Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Today, I rise to speak about Bill 216, to amend the Income Tax Act. I will say right away that the Bloc Québécois is in favor of this bill, which makes the tax framework for nonprofits more flexible. For the benefit of those listening, this bill would reduce some measures that add an administrative burden to charitable organizations. The bill would amend the Income Tax Act to authorize charitable organizations to place their resources at the disposal of a person who is not a recognized donor when they take reasonable measures to ensure that the resources are exclusively used for charitable purposes. And that enables them to create more effective partnerships with organizations that may not be charitable in themselves, while maintaining accountability and transparency. This bill was tabled a year ago, and it aims to address certain problems that are currently facing charitable organizations under the current tax system. And I hope sincerely that it will be adopted this time so that we can help our charitable services. I was elected in 2019, Madam Speaker, and for many years I worked at the Community Development Organization of the Haute-Laurentide region, which brought together 98% of charitable or non-profit organizations in the region. Some organizations that were in the social economy as well, but they all had a common goal: to improve the quality of life for more vulnerable people. But depending on their source of revenue, whether from fundraising, donations, or grants, they often have issues with the quality of their services because of a lack of human resources. I've seen that very often these people needed a full-time employee, almost, just to fill out the forms for various programs, for grants, and for accountability. And in my opinion, when the needs are major like they are, this is counterproductive. These organizations are constantly asked to revisit their services. But as I was saying, these services are offered very often because there's a lack of assistance from the public sector. These services are important. As long as poverty is part of our lives, as long as governments have not invested enough for vulnerable people, and as long as these very important people are working to help people in a context which is not at all competitive, we will need these organizations. Now, the pandemic has made the organizations very vulnerable because in many cases they had to offer additional services, and this was difficult to manage, and yet at the same time, the very volunteers who were working for the organization were affected by lockdowns. For example, people over 70. So in many cases, these people had to isolate rather than help others as they would normally do. More than 73% of these organizations saw their volunteer staff reduced. Madam Speaker, I've been speaking with these organizations regularly, thanks to Zoom. And I see these organizations performing miracles on a shoestring. And they have played a central role in making the negative consequences of some measures used for certain populations visible. And they have been very useful in bringing to the public's attention the blind spots of the government's response to the crisis. Therefore, their essential role became even more critical during the pandemic. And in Quebec, 3/4 of community organizations saw a significant increase in support needs, psychological needs, food, housing. We all know that's very important, and referrals. That's according to the Réseau québécois de l'action communautaire autonome. And it's extremely concerning. It's very concerning to hear that over 3,000 organizations were going through this. We know that a lot of workers in this sector are burning out. They already had so few resources, and now it's even worse. We know that 3/4 of organizations are having trouble keeping people in the positions that exist, and then 4 out of 5 are having difficulty filling open positions. And yet people still have the same needs for the services that these organizations offer. They are such an important part of our social safety network. And the government needs to facilitate their work while ensuring they remain accountable. I would like to thank these organizations very sincerely, especially those in my riding. I've seen your kindness and your generosity. It's remarkable. It's something that should be mentioned and that you should be thanked for. Madam Speaker, we know that some of these organizations, about half, in fact, receive public sector assistance, which means that another 50% did not get it. And the reason that some did not receive this assistance is because the administrative burden is extremely high. It's very difficult, but this bill aims to make the burden lesser. And I'm happy to say that some programs have been implemented. For example, the wage subsidy and others, like the Federal Emergency Fund for organizations working with the homelessness, which is excellent, and the Emergency Fund for community support, working with United Way and other organizations. It's all excellent. But according to a survey by the IRIS institution at the end of 2020, half of all organizations in this sector had not received any grant to support them during the first wave.
Madam Speaker, having experienced from the inside the precariousness of our organizations, we know that organizations struggle to receive funding for the mission for which they were created. The mission means that people have to concern themselves to rather fill forms out or actually be accountable. So any proposal we have here in the House of Commons that seek to lighten, better define, or even facilitate mutual financial assistance between organizations is evidently going to be received with great openness on our part. Finally, I would like to take a moment to explain to everyone what S-216 expressly proposes. It is very simple. That is to amend the definitions of charitable activities and to remove the requirements that the activities be specific to the charity in question, and instead allow said charities to make transfers to non-charity entities. So this becomes much more flexible, and we commend this. In order to ensure accountability, Madam Speaker, the bill requires a charity to conduct due diligence. Of course, reasonable due diligence on the organizations with which it plans to work. Simply put, the Bloc Québécois believes that this modernization of the current framework will facilitate work for NPOs that will thereafter be able to provide their services more effectively. At the end of the day, S-216 could help support a greater number of people in need. Thank you, Madam Speaker.